In light of recent events, it's become incredibly hard not to talk about this. So let's go with something kinda related to it, but then not related to it. At least not anymore. Because an F1 icon straight from the 1970s might have dropped a very big hint that Checo's revenge arc may soon begin. Don't worry, I'm not using that for the title of this video. Or did I? Ah, the Checo Perez story. Things have been looking up for him lately, haven't they? Even if he's not on the grid right now. But let's be honest, if there was ever a season to take a breather, this one might be it. If Sergio Perez was to take a sabbatical and just sit out the entire drama that is unfolding at Red Bull, what McLaren are doing, Ferrari's missteps, and then Mercedes somehow having good closure for this regulation cycle without Lewis Hamilton, then hey, just Checo staying out of all of that, especially with what was going on with Liam Lawson, not a bad shout, actually. Granted, it may not help Perez that he's 35 years old. He's no longer the wisecracking youngster he was back in 2011. I still remember him joking over the radio about losing power whilst at Sauber. But when you take into consideration how Nico Hülkenberg was able to turn things around upon his comeback a couple of years ago, at a similar age, as well as the greats of Alonso and Hamilton continuing into their 40s, in the case of Alonso maybe into his late 40s. But you know what I'm trying to get at here? Being 35 in Formula 1 is no longer a big deal, and it doesn't seem to be putting off the likes of Mario Andretti either. In fact, all of the trials and tribulations of Red Bull might have actually helped upsell Checo's stock with Andretti. This Planet F1 piece really grabbed my attention and inspired me to make this video. And to be fair, it would support my earlier prediction that Checo would be signing with that team for 2026. So, without further delay, here's what Mario had to say. Ahem. All I can say is that Liam Lawson is making Checo look very, very good. I wish I could tell you, but this is something we're keeping secret ourselves because we don't want to get our hopes up in some areas where it might not happen. So I think it's very important that we keep this between us until a final decision is made. There's a lot of drivers in the US, but because of licensing and everything else, there's definitely not too many options for an American driver. But the second driver, the second seat, will definitely be an experienced driver that could be available. And we all know that the selection in that sense is pretty clear. There could be 3 drivers to choose from. 3 drivers realistically to choose from. And I'm not going to tell you which ones. Now, you might be thinking, is that all you've got, Law? And Checo, really? Come on, he's done. He's washed. Red Bull sent him to the cleaners. But that first line of that quote, Mario Andretti, he dropped a huge hint that all the stuff that's been happening the last few weeks has completely rewritten the narrative regarding Checo. Sure, hindsight is 20/20 and all, but with the reality crystallizing that Red Bull's success was built akin to a Jenga tower, Liam Lawson's contractual shenanigans and subsequent return to Racing Bulls has definitely changed things in regards to the reputations of the mainstay of the midfield. Look, I understand that you may be sick and tired of hearing about Liam Lawson. I am too. Quite frankly, the New Zealander should just keep his head down, not say too much, completely own the mistakes that he did have, and just try and reimagine his image amongst the paddock, walk some quotes back. And maybe score some points to try and justify your place in Formula 1, especially with Arvid Lindblad around the corner. Because Liam is important in this context. Maybe Sergio's experience could be an incredibly useful asset in how to not only run a front-running Formula 1 team, but in also how not to run one. It's all valuable intel at the end of the day for a brand new team with no residual knowledge that would be a given had General Motors simply just bought out an existing team in a turnkey deal. You remember all of those rumours that the Andretti team would be buying out Renault's shares in Team Enstone and would take over operations there, so that means it would be relatively simple and actually approved by the F1 boards, as in no loss of prize money. Not to mention Checo saying that he's in talks with many different representatives from multiple teams up and down the grid for 2026, when contracts may become available again or may be cut short, ebbing and flowing as it were. Cadillac may be one of those. They may be in advanced talks already, because according to the Times, Cadillac declined to comment on it, not outright denying it. But at the same time, Mario is casting an eye on the US motorsport scene, maybe trying to realise the long-held belief that Colton Herta over in IndyCar could make the switch after years of speculation on the matter. But there are limitations to consider here, as well as the inclination of Herta himself, and maybe the amount of super license points he has to his name. Look, you can't blame Mario Andretti for really wanting to back one of his own Andretti boys because Colton Herta is one of them, but at the same time, this has been going on now for the better part of 2-3 years, rumours about Herta joining this team or that team. Understandably, he might be getting sick and tired of these rumours, maybe trying to distract him from his IndyCar game, because at the moment he's not off to one of the best starts. He's picking up the pace, but he's certainly not in contention at the moment, akin to Alex Palou and Pato O'Ward and the like. And speaking of Pato O'Ward, maybe it might work out for him after all, because O'Ward has made it clear that he is interested in Formula One. He has been a mainstay of the testing department of McLaren. Zach Brown and Mario Andretti, they do have connections. I mean, we all remembered seeing Mario Andretti rocking up in a 2013 McLaren around Laguna Seca. That was still pretty awesome. So there is a clear bond there, and if there is an opportunity to get an American-based talent, I know that Pato O'Ward is Mexican-Irish, but he is well known for his efforts in IndyCar and being the Neely man in the Indy 500 on multiple occasions. So finally getting that plumb into Formula One is something that may be appealing, and maybe with Cadillac, that might be a fair shout. Could be a really cool opportunity. Because I doubt that Alex Palou would go anywhere near Formula One after all of the contractual situations and issues with McLaren and the lawsuit that's still ongoing. And I mean, that's pretty awkward. So I doubt that Alex would want to draw attention to himself in the world of Formula One. I mean, he's winning IndyCar titles. I think he's good there. So maybe with Pato O'Ward and Sergio Perez as their first lineup at Cadillac, we might have an all-Mexican lineup, and the world might go crazy. This might be a really popular combination. Look, I understand that you might be sick and tired of yet another opportunity of me to have some negative chatter around Red Bull. I get it. It's been quite deafening the last couple of weeks. Well, as my late father would have put it, in this situation, if I was getting aggrieved by this, he would have gone, well, you know the answer to that then. What is it? Stop doing it then! I mean, of course, I had to desaturate it a little bit for YouTube, but you get what I mean here. If you want people to stop talking badly about you, stop doing bad things. That said, Cadillac's need for an experienced hand does strengthen Checo's case, though Bottas is clearly in the mix too. He's got years inside a dominant F1 system, one that in hindsight looks a heck of a lot more stable than whatever Red Bull's got going on at the moment under Christian Horner. However, one thing that I do think works against Valtteri is his 3-year tenure with Alfa Romeo/Sauber. It wasn't exactly the best of times, Valtteri admitting himself that it had been a mistake. So whilst I do feel sorry for Valtteri having to put up with a really ineffective and stalling Sauber for 2 seasons at the very least, it really has made a dent in his overall standing amongst other Formula One teams, whereas Sergio Perez, after what's happened with Liam Lawson and everything completely falling apart around Red Bull, it's making people rethink their assessments regarding Sergio. It just makes you think, had he remained in Red Bull for 2025, people may have started to maybe question that, hey, is the RB21 not really developed to Checo? But it would be nowhere near as loud and as prominent as it is today. You know, people would still be going, oh, no, it's Checo, it's Checo, it's Checo. But what might really seal the deal for Cadillac and Sergio, it's not just about his Red Bull experience. It's that key factor I always talk about, feeling wanted. That's what got McLaren Piastri, and why he's already on a second extension. But anyway, my opinion is once again justified regarding Checo in the comments Sergio made to my fellow Lawrence of the Barretto variety in his dreams of returning to Formula One with the right kind of team. So allow me to provide you his comments so that we may compare and contrast with the comments that Mario Andretti made, and maybe see if they start to actually, connect or entwine or really become immensely compatible. I mean, yeah, I do think it's fascinating. Ahem. If I find a project that motivates me fully to come back, where the team believe in me and where they appreciate my career, my experience and everything I can bring to a team, it would be very attractive to consider it. That's why I've given myself at least 6 months to get all my options on the table and make a decision on what I do next with my career. There are very few interesting projects out there. I've been approached by a few teams since Abu Dhabi. Right now, the season has started, so a few things will open up in the coming months. We are talking to a few parties out there. Once I know all my options, I will make a decision. What is very clear to me is that I'm only coming back if the project makes sense, and it's something I can enjoy. I spent a long time in F1 already. I've done most of it. Once you step back, you realize how much you give up in life to be in the sport. So to be fully in F1 committed, I need the motivation. It just reminds me of Carlos Sainz all over again. You really get the feeling that Sergio is taking a leaf out of Sainz's book, as in, take your time with your decision. Only come back if you believe in the team, not just for the paycheck or somewhere to just lie low for a couple of years and then get back to a front-running team. You've got to evaluate. That's what my history teacher said, and that's why I was able to ace my A2 paper on the Tudors. Evaluate! But these comments of Checo's, they really line up well with what Mario said, don't they? Cadillac's advisor's interest in Checo has only grown in recent weeks, casting a new light on his efforts in recent years, whilst Perez has become more concerned with how a team carries itself, rather than just simply chasing more and more money, because he's got plenty of that. He's easily one of the biggest names in Mexico at the moment. He's got it made. He's popular. He's in demand. He's good. He's fine in that regard. He'll only come back to F1 if he believes in a project that will make him feel wanted and give him a second chance. So basically, Cadillac has to be a place where Sergio Perez's word is taken seriously, valued, and then implemented as soon as possible, instead of what happened in Spain 2023, where Checo actually flagged up some potential issues with the RB19. But since Max Verstappen was doing so well, and then he got 10 victories in a row, Checo's words were not heeded, as admitted by one Christian Horner. And then what happened with Max Verstappen after Imola, his words not being heeded or not taken seriously enough, Red Bull were not paying attention to their own drivers, including the guy that they got completely blinkered on, that they just couldn't think outside the box. Pierre Vacher, he is Schrodinger's cat. He's always in the box. At the same time, when you take in Perez's significant commercial appeal in key markets like Mexico, these comments could also suggest that if Cadillac can put together an attractive package, Checo may well be chosen over other candidates such as Valtteri Bottas or Zhou Guanyu. Wait, Zhou? What does he bring in terms of experience? He only raced in F1 for 3 seasons. Well, to be fair, his case is helped somewhat by his connections with Cadillac F1's team principal, Graham Loudon, who is also Zhou Guanyu's manager. So he does know the Chinese driver inside and out throughout his entire career, or at least the vast majority of it. When you add in the Ferrari connection and the potential subsidy for Zhou's salary, it does make some logical sense to at least consider Zhou. But even Loudon said back in 2022 that it's an extreme oversimplification to assume that it's all about money whether or not some of his guys would get chosen. His Ferrari ties may help, but they could just as easily limit him compared to someone with no academy baggage like Checo. It's not as simple as saying he is guaranteed a seat at this time when compared to more storied racers, but if the search for an American-based star doesn't produce a worthwhile candidate, a Zhou Perez lineup is plausible. But in any case, I'm glad that Zhou Guanyu's getting some love from the Ferrari Driver Academy and that they're paying attention to him. There is one thing to be said about the Ferrari Driver Academy. Sure, in terms of Formula 1, Leclerc and Hamilton have got those seats occupied. At least with their academy drivers, Ferrari gives them something to do. There's also the matter of the contractual negotiations with the sponsors surrounding the driver. If Cadillac deems them to not be compatible with their remit, then it wouldn't be in their own best interest in regards to establishing themselves on the grid. Yes, Cadillac's spot on the grid is finally confirmed, that is true. Trust me, I tasted that relief firsthand. But behind the scenes, there's more at play. Their first driver lineup will shape public perception around them. Choosing someone with experience and popularity could win over fans fast. That's huge for both the team and General Motors. And Mexico is a crucial market for automakers. Checo's massive popularity there could give Cadillac a major boost, tapping into his fan base. Because you've only got to look at all of the stuff and interactions that Sergio Perez does with his existing sponsors to note that he is a huge marketable force there in that particular region of the world. And it is my belief that in the not too distant future, in the next several decades, Mexico could easily find itself in a really high position on the global scene. I do think it is relatively plausible sometime this century, and that maybe it can provide them many opportunities, not just on the track as they get themselves settled in, hopefully not propping up the constructors table, but somewhere, 8th. I think that's perfectly reasonable. It's what Haas did in 2016. But one attitude that I think Cadillac wants to eschew themselves of is that all they are capable of producing are really big, bulky, low-sprung, soft cars that all they do is just cushion your bum, and sure, they may look imposing, but they're not really good at doing anything than going straight. No, they're looking much sharper these days, and I think Formula 1, if they can really hit the ground running with the right facilities, they might be able to do a really good job for their reputation. And the work that Andretti put in establishing themselves at Silverstone and bringing in so many talented and convincing people from multiple F1 teams that are already established, yeah, I think they're pretty good. And if Checo can show GM that the last couple of years weren't the full picture for him, and that with the right team around him he can still deliver, this could be his redemption shot, a chance to prove Red Bull wrong for narrowing their car development around Max and only using Checo for his money, and allowing somebody who doesn't even work for Red Bull Racing to chip away at his legacy that he built for over a decade. And most importantly, if the team is a place where they really want to convince Checo that he is well and truly valued, if most importantly he can get the right race engineer that he really vibes with instantly and can provide him exactly what he wants on the track, it could work wonders. As I said in my Lance Stroll video the other day, if you can get the right person on board, it can easily change the perception or your attitude of Formula One in general. Gary Gannon with Lance Stroll has turned out to be a wondrous and surprising combination and has resulted in Lance Stroll's best ever start to a season. I know, it's shocking, it's very early days, but you have to accept that. 10 points in 2 races, that's Lance's best ever start. It is, factually. Nico Hülkenberg's race engineer was Gary Gannon. It proved to be exceptional at getting the most out of the German. That working relationship has now arguably provided him the perfect springboard to secure that plum ticket of representing Audi, another German marque, to go with the Porsche accreditation that he had at Le Mans a decade previously. And admittedly, Gary Gannon's efforts were so good with Nico, it allowed Hülkenberg to be frisky at the Austrian Grand Prix so he could fudge around and screw around with Checo's race in a Haas. That's how good a race engineer and driver relationship can be. So arguably, you could say that, sure, maybe Hugh Bird wasn't able to provide Sergio Perez a platform to really go up against Max Verstappen in the last couple of years of their tenureship together, but at the same time, you could argue that maybe Hugh Bird was just enough to keep Checo at least in contention for keeping his seat right up until the bitter end. Right up to the moment when Hugh Bird went on paternity leave, perfectly reasonable and understandable. I do think paternity leave is very important in establishing a bond with your newborn child. But it is safe to say, with that time without Hugh, it did further destabilise Checo. And as we saw with Bottas when he got a brand new race engineer in Miami without being told, it almost caused him to crash into Piastri at the first corner. So if you don't have that connection, it can easily work against you, much like if you do have the connection, it could work wonders for you. It's more important than you think. More people should really understand how important a race engineer can be. Fun fact, by the way, guess who was Checo's first race engineer at Force India 2014? It was none other than GP himself before he then went on to Red Bull. I just thought it was quite funny and I just really wanted to tell you. It was also really productive because in their third race together, Checo secured Force India their first ever podium. That was really quick. That was a really good sign. Who knows what may have happened if GP remained with Checo? And what may have happened to Max Verstappen. But in all seriousness, Force India was where Checo's real value in F1 came to light after a really strong start with Sauber, and after a clearly incompatible single season with McLaren at the start of their downward trend. He then spent 7 seasons as the backbone of a scrappy underdog team that punched regularly above its weight, bagging points and podiums against better funded rivals. That's where he got the name the Tyre Whisperer. He was able to make that car work and get to positions where nobody expected to actually get to. He was part of the force with Hülkenberg to find Force India 4th place in the Constructors. And if you read Bernie Collins' book, you really do understand that Force India were completely underfunded and under-equipped against many other more competitive rivals. It was only after Papa Stroll started to inject cash where they actually had tools to do the job on the regular. And at Red Bull, you've got to consider that Checo still faced enormous pressure even though he was saved by Christian at the 11th hour of 2020. He was still stacked against a generational teammate, and a team that had tunnel vision for his preferences and setup. He warned things were off, and it showed when even Max called for change by Imola 2024. Nevertheless, when you take recent events into account, Checo was still able to fend off Lewis Hamilton and keep the runner-up spot in 2023, and he was still at least able to score some points in the RB20, even in the back end of 2024 when things really took a turn for the worse for him, whereas with Liam Lawson, he couldn't even get the car out of Q1, and on both Grand Prix starts, he had to start from the pit lane because they had to make last-minute setups setup changes. But nevertheless, you saw throughout 2024 that Checo kept trying. He got the right people behind him, a sports psychologist. He managed to silence the noise of Dr. Marco. He kept trying regardless. And maybe it's that application which may have also impressed the likes of Mario Andretti, who is in charge of driver scouting at Cadillac. That's his main job, talent sourcing, that maybe he's looking at what Checo was able to do and rise above and thinking, that's the kind of guy that we want. As well as that oodles and poodles of cash that Mexico has to hand and Carlos Slim. I mean, yes, you might be thinking, well, doesn't that make Checo a paid driver then? Well, sure. But at the same time, you can easily argue the same thing of Yuki, because Yuki comes with $20 million of sponsorship money from Honda. These days, drivers have to be attributed to some cash in order to try and make it. That's just what the path of the course is these days. But at least some drivers have the skill to back it up. It's not the days of, Latifi, Mazepin, where their talent really did not hold a candle to the amount of wealth they came with. Now it seems evenly matched. And also, they might be wanting the Checo of Force India, a driver that can maybe work with a team that may not have the same level of development that other established outfits have. And it may save them against Bottas, because Valtteri had his best years in a well-oiled machine at Mercedes, but that support may have masked some cracks, which kind of laid themselves bare when at times in a car that should have cut through the field, Valtteri simply got himself stuck. But seriously, Checo is a driver that Cadillac has no choice but to consider. To ignore him will be a disservice to a fan base that has been reinvigorated after years of not having a Mexican representative on the grid. They had that with Checo in the good times. In fact, it was Sergio's good form at Force India that spurred that final push to get the Mexico City Grand Prix back on the calendar. And seriously, Cadillac, an all-American team, it really could do well with getting two drivers who have a huge presence and could easily try and raise them up, provide a really good launch pad to start their time in Formula One, because you've only got to look at the last couple of years. Andretti, then General Motors, all of the resistance they had to put up with, they really now have to justify that they do deserve to be on the grid and that they will provide. And having Sergio Perez as one of your drivers, the experienced one, that will help immensely. Which is partly why I predicted Perez would be one of their drivers months ago. It all makes sense in multiple respects, and when you get the guy in charge of recruiting basically telling us without telling us that Checo is looking likely to be the best candidate to help them guide their first seasons in Formula One, then it's most likely going to happen. I mean, you've even got to look back at when Red Bull signed on Checo at the end of 2020, when Papa Stroll ejected Checo despite securing that masterful win and secure 2020 from the back to the front in, admittedly, a pink Mercedes. Even then, that was still not enough to fend off the likes of the incoming Sebastian Vettel. And Red Bull got so much kudos of, yeah, you saved Checo! Thank you, Christian, for giving him a go! I mean, people were sad about Alex Albon being booted out at the same time, even though he was the reserve driver and he got some DTM stuff. But when you now look back at it, with Alex Albon potentially rejecting Christian's advances last May, and yeah, maybe this was for the best for Alex as well, being at Williams at a place where he feels wanted. Checo would want to be somewhere that he is wanted. And the only thing that Christian Horner wanted from Checo was his moolah. And maybe in other avenues and aspects, his silence and loyalty? Yeah. Foam. As more and more news comes out from the antics of Red Bull Racing from several angles and sources, it's providing more and more evidence to suggest that Checo was up against it after all, and that Max Verstappen, despite his grievances with Sergio in 2022, had always insisted that it was all down to the car that should be blamed and not the driver. Maybe we should listen to Max, unlike Pierre Vacher. Maybe we should allow this Cadillac news to happen. I mean, it would make for a good news story, right? Maybe Checo getting his redemption with the likes of General Motors, maybe the good news story that we realised that we always wanted but never knew. Which may explain why there's so much buzz around Yuki Tsunoda's first races for the senior team. With Checo wishing his former colleague well, even if it doesn't work out for the Japanese driver, at least he had the opportunity after having done the time. To find out why, I think there is just cause for optimism regarding Yuki Tsunoda's future in Formula One, especially if he can actually find himself starting off relatively competently compared to Lawson. Watch this video next, straight after this one.